Welcome, everyone. You are, for all of you in the audience and coming in, this is the first reading in the full second season of the Meet Me There reading series at Charis Books. I'm Samuel Ace, and I'm your host for the evening. Usually, someone from Charis, E.R. Anderson, the wonderful president director of Charis, is here, but due to unforeseen circumstances, I'm going to not only be hosting and introducing our readers, but also the tech behind the scenes. So bear with me if there are any issues. This is my first time doing this, and but I think I have it down. Hopefully, if you're having any problems at all, let me know in the chat. The Meet Me There series is a monthly reading series featuring the work of trans and queer authors who increasingly are bringing new books and creative energy into the world. I'm the host of the series tonight because of all of the contingencies. I'm just really happy to be here. This event often takes place on the second Thursday of each month at 7:30 Eastern Time. But because of some often unforeseen scheduling issues, the dates might change. I know they already have for our readings in November and December, so just pay attention to the Charis calendar, Charis Books and More, and their calendar keeps up to date on our readings. Also, just want to thank this book in Decatur, Georgia, outside of Atlanta, especially E.R. Anderson and Dartricia Rollins, who really the whole Charis crew for their leadership in bringing this series to fruition. This is Charis's 50th anniversary. It's really hard to believe for an independent bookstore, just unheard of that 50 years for really one of the most activist queer bookstores in the South, but really throughout the country that's been in business that long. And on November 2nd, there's going to be a big party for any of you who are in the Atlanta area celebrating Charis and their service to the community. So we want to make it possible for them to thrive for the next 50 years. I did put in the chat up at the top a link to that event, but also at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a big green button, so that you can go to their website, purchase books, pre-order the books that are being featured tonight, and any other books from this wonderful, wonderful independent bookstore. So at every one of these readings in the series, I do throw out the question, why host a series featuring queer, trans authors at one of the most radical and activist bookstores in the country, and a bookstore that regularly features queer writers and authors? My answer is always that there's never, ever enough. And in this time, perhaps beyond any other time when there are just increasingly violent attacks on trans folks worldwide, there's just simultaneously an incredible flowering of trans and queer literature. I know we could almost put on a reading every night and not cover all the books that are being put out into the world. So that's why it's just never, never enough. And as we know, our visibility does change lives. And with that visibility, it's no surprise that the violent, increasingly vocal, legal, even resistance to our work has increased. It's growing louder, more desperate. So again, it's just never, never enough. If you haven't done so already, I already mentioned the website, but go to the Charis website because there is an event almost every night. And all of them are live streamed. Some of them are in person, but even those are live streamed. So this one is fully virtual. Some of the Meet Me There series are in person, but you can always access them online. They're also archived and recorded, and can be found on the Charis channel on YouTube. If you just search for Meet Me There at Charis, you'll find all of our past readings. So tonight we celebrate I'm so excited, three stunning new books by two celebrated poets, Joy Ladin and Oliver Baez Bendorf. Ladin has two new books out from Persea, a book of poems, family, and a long overdue collection of her essays, one out of nature, selected essays on the transformation of gender. Bendorf's Consider the Rooster, coming out October 1st from Nightboat, is his third full-length collection. And again, you can pre-order it now. And Joy's books, they're all available on the website at that green button. And just remember to support Charis by purchasing or pre-ordering their books from their website. Perhaps in the way of small communities, in this case, the ever-expanding community of trans poets whose overlapping circles of work, books, friendships, concerns, and presences in the world have crossed mine in many persistent and formative ways. Joy Ladin and Oliver Bendorf have been consistent beacons. I've known and learned from them for years and eagerly await the appearance of each new poem and essay. I feel like they're ancestors before their ancestors, and then family in some long line of family in the most important ways. I'm going to again introduce both writers and their work here instead of interrupting in between the writers. I find common to their work and the urgency of their being in the world is that their lives are not lives eased by the majority. Their lives, our lives and bodies, feel the effects, the visible and invisible pressures of just trying to live in a marginalized body. Ladin and Bendorf claim poetry as survival. Their work is a call, a witness to say, I'm here and alive, willing to show the stakes, the joys, and the consequences. In Consider the Rooster, Bendorf asks us to consider, but even more, regard the rooster as a creature, the one who speaks too loudly, insists on his presence, who fractures with raucous insistence the false idols of our country. So does transness. So does calling attention to the proud heraldry of self-knowledge. Not to be confused with narcissism at all, it's the opposite. It's a lyric to reconciliation and identity. Though filled with joy, I also find great grief in some of these poems. They give voice to the right to exist, to stand against the inevitable destructive forces, but the poems also acknowledge the exhaustion inherent in doing so. We experience in these poems both the wild and beautiful invasiveness of weeds and wildflowers, the inimitable call of the rooster, the escape of a backyard chicken, but also another kind of invasiveness, that of pristine laws pesticided into some carpet of, I don't even know what, reminiscence, nostalgia, order, control. These poems, as beautifully crafted as they are, often want to lose control. This is a quote. All I've named has a life outside of me, Oliver says as he shows us words strung over and across the page, cascading down or simply existing as a single phrase on a page otherwise empty of text, not unlike breath. This is the book. It's huge. I have to just show it. It's huge. This is bigger than my head. It's really wonderful. I encourage you to get a hard copy of this book because the weight and the size of it is extraordinary. It just holds the poems like sculptures, which they are. Each shape is very particular, encircled by its form. There's room to breathe into the solidity of language, which of course is not solid at all, perhaps not unlike gender itself. Each person, Oliver states, quote, has their own cone and sees their very own rainbow. It does not otherwise exist, and it is not located at any particular point in space. Or he says elsewhere, quote, I stood there squinting into the heavens, thinking if star can also be dust cloud or nebula or black note or black hole, then surely gender is far stranger than we've imagined and much more beautiful, unfurling over decades, a phenomenon. Isn't that amazing? I love that. And this is also a perfect segue into the work of Joy Ladin. Over the years, I've read many, many of the essays in One Out of Nature, but it's an absolute joy to see them here for the first time collected together. In their gathering, we witness the brilliant range and heart of Joy's thinking. In the preface to the book, she states that she is most interested not in the differences between us, but in the overlap, the common ground, the heart behind the rhetoric. In the text, we experience a constant search for those commonalities. She vilifies no one, even those who have or who would most hurt her and us, even anti-trans feminists. This is not window dressing on Joy's part, I feel, but prescient and absolutely necessary at this moment in time when the public attacks on trans folks are multiplying every day. There are those who seek to demonize us, we know that, and to whom we're nothing more than political football, who use language sure to stir up violence and hatred. And of course, we want to look away, but Joy doesn't. She searches out and names the fear beneath all of that rhetoric. Her words are heart-filled descriptions thrown into a maelstrom. Pay attention, and maybe there's a way through for all of us. Joyce says that, quote, each of these essays considers gender from a different perspective, but all aim to reduce the anxieties that drive us apart by thinking and talking about gender in ways that bring us together. I personally have believed forever that each of us possesses our own gender. There are commonalities, perhaps, but there are also overlaps. And the more that any individual, trans, identified, or even more important, not, can look at the specificity of their gender, the more we can hear and relate to each other. Quote from Joy, my gender is a mud hole. I love this passage. A willful remixing of physical and human nature that defies separation into neat categories like male and female, natural and artificial, challenging the idea that those categories like male and female, natural and artificial, challenging the idea that those categories are mutually exclusive, that we can clearly, conclusively distinguish them all. That perhaps is why some react so violently to people like me. We are mirrors in which they see the artificiality of the natural binary of male and female, its incompleteness, its inadequacy, the contradictions it simplifies. And her poetry does the same in a very concrete way. In her manifesto for a trans poetics, which first came out in Troubling the Line, the first Troubling Line Trans and Genderqueer Poetry, the first anthology of trans and genderqueer poetry in the country, edited by T.C. Tolbert and Trace Peterson. He says poetry translates existential experience, including experience for which we have no words, into linguistic form, sound, and texture. That makes it a perfect mode for expressing, however indirectly, unstable, contradictory, inexpressible, or profoundly uncomfortable gender identities, as long as we have a definition of translit that finds trans content not just in demographics and subject matter, but in syntax, word choice, and other qualities of language. And her poems do that. With that, I give you the third reading.
Thank you so much, Sam, and I'm so grateful to you and Charis for doing this and for giving me a chance to read with Oliver again. Um, I don't think I've seen you since we were at Smith College together. That
Yeah.
was a that was a wonderful time. Um, and it feels apropos to mention that I met Sam because we were both on the first trans poetry panel that AWP ever allowed to exist. And remember, they moved it to this very, very hard to find and extremely small room. And there were people spilling out into the corridor. And the fact that there were more people than could fit into the room signaled to me that regardless of AWP, we were going to be okay. Um, and it has been really a pleasure and an honor to stay in touch with you, Sam, over these years. Um, I think, perversely, I have planned to read um, poems that are not particularly trans-oriented. One of the things about being trans and non-binary is that it's easy for that to seem like it should eclipse every other aspect of being an embodied human being. And like that's the most spectacular, the most complicated, the most problematic thing about anybody. But I don't know about you, but for me, pretty much every aspect of being an embodied human being is spectacular and complicated um, and messy. Um, I am going to finish though with a poem that grows out of transpoetics. So, the Family is a book where I'm writing really more directly, personally, and autobiographically than I've done before. In other words, it's taken me until my 60s to do what most American poets are doing as soon as they start writing. I had a slow learner there. Um, but the book touches on a lot of things that I haven't spoken about publicly before, and including growing illness and disability. And I want to start with a poem called Disability. It's one of a number of what I call haiku suites, which are sequences of three-line poems that are inspired by the colloquial haiku of Isa, who I adore. Disability. I stare at the trees that line my street the way old sailors stare at the sea. Time to get used to wearing mortality on my sleeve. The needle, as always, goes in. Today, clouds fill the syringe. Sun on my face, twittering birds, and time to notice them. What a relief to see how little the world depends on me. The first leaves sidle down, feathers from a bird of gold who flies by letting go. Um, Another thing that was going on while this book was growing into itself was my mother's intensifying dementia and death. I know this is an experience that many people have gone through. I suspect it's shocking for everybody every single time. It certainly was for me. Um, this is called Last Spring, and it's another haiku suite. As winter melts into spring, my mother keeps asking when summer will end. I wasn't the healthiest child, she says. How did I get so old? Spring in the courtyard. My mother tells me how lonely she is. She still remembers that. I see her organs failing in the sunset colors of her swollen lower lids. Robin, please, before it's too late, remind my mother it's spring. Um, oh, it's right here. If any of you have been fortunate enough, as Sam and I have, to live in the Pioneer Valley, the Amherst Northampton area, you know that it is kind of overwhelmingly beautiful almost all of the time. And no matter what is going on in one's own life, it's overwhelmingly beautiful. So even in the midst of this other stuff, this was one of the most beautiful summers I've ever lived through. And happily, um, I was also able to pay attention to that. This is called summering. All night, two cicadas call and answer across the unmown yard. Sleep rustles through your body, wind through moonlit corn. I wake in your arms to a chipmunk repeating the only word it knows. All the branches shake at once, then silence, leaves and sun. Car horn, cardinal, potato frying. It's not just me. Today, the world sounds happy. This is a prose poem. And just like that, my mother is dying. My mother has been dying for years. My mother, like me, was always dying. But today my mother's failing clock of a heart lurched ahead towards stopping. Too much beating, too little breathing. Too much sweating, too much urinating, too little oxygen, too little sleeping. The hospice nurse says my mother has been given morphine and is resting. The woman who helped her through the night weeps into the mask it isn't safe to stop wearing. My mother is saying goodbye one organ at a time. Her eyes and mine keep leaking. Yesterday she was sitting up and talking, forgetting every word we were saying, yes, but she was breathing. When I arrived, it was raining. The screens on her windows dim with drops, caught as they were falling. Overnight, springs become summer. Heat, blossoming, birds which since 4 a.m. have not for a moment stopped singing. There has never, since the beginning of the world, been a more beautiful morning. A morning more inseparable from morning. By the time I reach my mother, she's once more breathing normally, but for the first time, wearing pajamas in the afternoon. I say, as though I care, that spring has suddenly become summer. Is it almost Christmas, my mother asks? Time means something different to her now. It always has. Some other kind of love bound us across a continent we rarely crossed, decades we didn't share. Love that when I was young, suddenly I feel young again. I called loneliness. I really can't bear to do this, but poetry can't keep us insulated from yet another election. I almost get the anti-democratic thing, because then your stomach doesn't have to lurch for an entire year every 4 years. But that is where we are. So I'm going to read a poem from from our 2016 go round, actually, with this. It's called "Trying to Write About the Torah," the Hebrew Bible. Please don't elect a dictator when I'm trying to write about the Torah. The Torah's ways are paths of peace, underground streams that never run dry or overflow, no matter how the climate changes. So it's hard to write about the Torah as forests burn and seas swallow island nations, when the Torah is an unsinkable ark, preserving at least two versions of every kind of truth to populate whatever worlds emerge when waters recede or part. And it's hard to write about a Torah that floats on waves of extinction, genuses and species, plants and peoples, lives we're happy to live, futures we can bear to imagine, when, a few verses after the flood, the very first rainbow is already shining, Pharaoh sinking, millions of slaves celebrating the first Juneteenth. It's hard to write about the Torah when the Torah and the world are written on one another, black fire and white fire, when both are always burning to ashes, and when the world keeps turning to ashes and smoke, and the Torah is not consumed. Sam, do I have time for two more poems? Okie dokie. Yeah, I can't bear to leave that there. One of the things that I'm very happy to do is Despite the fact that she always makes a face when I read them to her, I like writing my wife love poems. And and at one point, her reaction was so stressed out that I just didn't, there was a birthday or an anniversary or whatever. I let it go, and she was like, "What happened to my poem?" I'm like, "It's excruciating for you. What do you mean?" She's, "Yeah, but I want it anyway." So there's a sequence in here called Anniversaries, made out of poems written for one or another anniversary. This is called When You're in New York, while we were living apart and I was housebound. You walk through the world and I walk too, shrinking and stretching inside your shadow, glinting like sun on your glasses. A bus is kneeling at the shelter, and look, I'm the shelter, and also the driver, kneeling thoughtfully in case you want to enter, then roaring off through the city that loves you almost as much as I do, posing for your pictures, trying to look familiar, trying to look brand new, leading you through turns and tunnels to treasures cloistered in the oldest layers, rocks and shells and bits of paper, bones and wounds for you to discover. Whatever I have been or done is yours. You're the center of my map, the sun I bask in beside the turtles, the neighborhood I grew up in, the little place no one else will ever find, where you and I are drinking wine and falling in love again. So she is very lucky not to be here and have to hear me read that. Um, so I'd like to finish with a book from Shekhinah Speaks, which was my previous book. And it's a book of poems written in the voice of the Shekhinah, the female aspect of divinity, according to Jewish mysticism. And, the Shekhinah was not born or raised female, but is identified by religious tradition as female. So I always had a thing for her as an archetype of trans female identity, actually. But when I was trying to write these poems for this character who has no body and is not human, I realized I needed transpoetics, because transpoetics is the art of representing ways of being that aren't conventional, that language is not designed to represent. So I'd like to finish with this poem, and this really was, most of them are not rooted in my trans experience, but this one definitely is. So the you in this poem is each human being. She's talking to each of us at once. And it's called Your Body. You keep trying to escape the body I love, the blazing crush of physicality, impurity, and shame, separating you from yourself, from your soul, from me, the body I formed in your mother's womb, delivered, dandled, nursed, and comforted, the body that fails you in so many ways, through which you struggle to materialize, the way tomorrow struggles to materialize through today, blessing through pain, love through the flesh I made, to be a place where you and I can rest, hang out, go crazy for one another, marry, say goodbye, apologize, plead, pledge, proclaim, be held and protected, given and accepted, born and born again. It's me you feel moving inside you, my presence that's so hard to reconcile with your sexual nature and the nature of sex, that sometimes you feel violated, devoured, tell yourself you're no good. Imagine me demanding you preach gospels of fire, gospels of bone, gospels of coming to an end. I didn't make you to end. I made you a whirlwind of appetites and offerings I never stop wanting, ceremony and sacrifice, wine and reckoning, comedy, coolness, birthing and healing, falling in love, romance, yes, and sex. Your body is a stream from which I drink, a hand I hold, a nipple I lick, a story I tell over and over, a Sabbath I keep for pleasure, a way of being alone, a way of being together, my choir, my throne, my crazy music, my dog-eared paperback. Thank you.
Thank you, Joy. Thank you so much. It was beautiful. Really wonderful to hear those poems. Now we have Oliver Bendorf.
That was beautiful, Joy. Thank you so much for the gift of sharing your work with us. It really is an honor to be with you again. Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here tonight. It means so much to share this space, especially in this virtual way that is bringing all of you from all these different places into the room. I'm always amazed at and thankful for the copper wires and the fiber optics of the internet that can do that, facilitating that magic. Yeah, Joy, that was beautiful. Again, thank you so much. I'm reading tonight from my new collection, Consider the Rooster. And this is a book of poems about transformation, survival, queer spirit. At the heart of the collection and what sparks these poems, the collection was sparked by my rooster, Walter Mercado, whose crow became a symbol for me of resistance and awakening during the early days of the pandemic. It weaves together often through the lens of nature and being a body, ideas about identity and belonging and mischief and survival. Yes, definitely. And always the dream also for more than survival, even though survival is no small thing. There's a lot of people's hands all over this book, and thank you to the team at Nightboat. And I want to send a special thanks to my amazing literary assistant, Helen, who is here tonight for her incredible support. And a big thank you to my co-reader, Joy, our host, Sam, and the folks at Charis Books. Please support them. Please support your bookstores. Okay. Consider the Rooster. Who did not ask to join this world any more than I did, who scans for trouble as he pecks the ground, who announces when a hawk lands in the naked maple above, who emits a low trill to warn the flock, who does this on instinct to protect potential offspring, who rarely takes a treat when offered scrap or seed, who instead yips to gather the hens around it, who sometimes does this regarding some shiny piece of trash, whose waddle catches light the way red lipstick does, who slept between breasts as a day-old cockerel, whose first attempt to crow sounded like a flopping sock, who directs with one stiff wing, who we thought would be a hen, who reminds all in earshot that, like it or not, another day has come and gone, who disturbs the interior idyll of the neighbor writing lectures on environmental philosophy, who keeps the hens alive to lay another day, who would risk his life to protect, who cockfighters gas up on steroids and provoke to battle, who they then point to as an example of how violence is natural among men, whose crow can scare away the devil and rouse the dead back to life, who will provoke a strong response of either humiliation or joy. God, I won't be your sacred chicken if it means I have to fight, but I will fight. I already scanned the perimeter. Testosterone, yes, I take it, which is not the same as fighting. The shape you see has nothing to do with me or the rooster. who sleeps in a cardboard box in the garage because the philosopher called the police, then asks for eggs. Do you hear that crow? That sounds almost like a recording of a crow. That's daybreak. It is regular, like daybreak or twilight. It rattles a certain window that matches its vibrational frequency. Because the glass, under all that strain of air molecules around it, finally decides to change. This next poem is titled Michigan, and it begins with an epigraph from a speech that Silvia Rivera gave at the Christopher Street Liberation Day Parade. Michigan. You all tell me, go and hide my tail between my legs. I will no longer put up with this shit. I have been beaten. I have had my nose broken. I have been thrown in jail. I have lost my job. I have lost my apartment for gay liberation. And you all treat me this way? What the fuck's wrong with you all? Think about that. That was Silvia Rivera. Daisy Fleabane arrives early after winter onslaught of lake effect. Snow melt becomes water that feeds wildflowers from the underside, becomes flood, comes family, a cellular structure for secrets. The year is 2020. Everyone is sick and healing. Not everyone. Everyone is sick or healing. Lives are precious or expendable. Expelled, expressed, released, sighed, sloughed off to replicate in someone else's precious or expendable lungs. Germination, occupation, months between vagus nerve and a memory of sociality. You might as well be in Michigan. I rolled into a pleasant peninsula seeking safe haven. And yes, sometimes an invisible cloak fits over my house. Caped children walk by carrying plastic pumpkins. I push grass ordinance to edges. A local construction of crime, legal height lowered, brace for tensions with neighbors. I mow a tiny strip around the meadow. The pollinator garden tickles the curb with liberated wildflowers. Fleabane daisies, such a startling puff of yellow, pink clover right over, and dock. Dead limbs rotting but controlled into compost. We will grow things here. We are in this together. I'll post a sign explaining and pray no one calls on the rooster who rushes to elevation to greet the day or warn of it. All day the same bugle, meaning something only in his kingdom, which I happen to live in. I surround myself in brown, deck stains and elk and moose of the Michigan flag, state whistle, toad song. Don't you know, sun cooks the shame away. Who else needs to survive? I'm trying to answer one question. I measure miles from the arbitrary border, drive through pharma for extra vials of testosterone, controlled substance. RX sees a criminal queer, scrutinizes ID, then dispenses a paper bag folded, closed, and stapled, which I toss empty passenger seat, sanitize my hands, keep driving. Fueled by fossils, north in Michigan. What is a mortgage? Is it a house of cards, a debt never meant to be repaid? Token of achievement in settlement's shadow? Am I the last loser in Michigan still banking on silence and pleasantries to protect me? Strangers, neighbors power walk past my ragged lawn. Their yards are dull and starve hummingbirds, monarchs, cardinals, and bees. How is that more beautiful? If I stay in line, if I keep my head down, if I work harder, etc. I have held my tail between my legs and saying grateful. I've been spit on for whose hand I held, harassed for the pants I wore, catcalled for existing. I've been slandered by the God Hates Fags family. I studied their church compound on Google Street View and saw the Pride Center painted in rainbow across the street. I can no longer be placated by the colorful advancement of rights. Depressed, to push or pull down. No wonder. An old ordinance still on the books bans fortune telling. Another way I am a criminal here. Between that and the forbidden meadow and some other elements and the privileges I am often permitted, I forgot to assemble, paid on time every month. Did homophobia's work by playing Smear the Queer. Sylvia didn't die for me to hide my tail between my legs. So I untether from my respectable nest, holding the X in my hand like a rosary and like a brick. I'm done being good. Spell for burned books. Juniper branches burned become calcium. Herb burns into relief. It destroys nothing. Nazi book burns began with third gender history plundered, 20,000 books torched in Opernplatz, paper into ash, smoke, water vapor. Take your eternal flames of damnation back. We've become, as we always have, another form entirely. That last poem, Spell for Burned Books, it has on its heart censorship and like what I think about a lot as like brilliant arts of survival. And in the world that both Sam and Joy have already been talking about, where queer and trans expression is so often stifled, poetry can become a necessary act of resistance, even rebellion, I think. A spell for shapeshifting, for solidarity, for living. And I think often about the poet Rain Arroyo, who in his last public words, the last public words that he spoke at a reading before he died, those words were live, then write. And those words have always struck me deeply, and they remind me that life itself is, it's a fundamental precursor to expression. And yeah, we must live before we can tell our stories or do anything with language. And I've been thinking also about how censorship, it's not just about books. And like, yeah, I've been rocked by, the unconscionable acts of horror that we live among today. And for me, these poems are about carving out space to live in a world that too often tries to erase people wholesale. They're also about making a racket when making a racket is called for. Becoming particulate. Becoming particulate. When a voice met the resonant frequency of the object, when the song crashed into glass as invisible waves, at last I began to vibrate. Finally, I exploded like a garage window the year the rooster sang. What was it that rattled me so astrologically? Or does it matter only that I was rattled, propelled from my brittle bunker into a new position, compromised now by such beauty as mist caressing a mountain, or how heavy the satchel of ashes lands against my ribcage? I pray my recollection of the neighbor dissolves into nothing when we leave this town. That however much the song I love rattled him too, that he forgets me entirely, for he exploded in a different way. Something about my mother is I learned to dry plastic baggies upside down. Though I'd never plant grass in a place I'm meant to stay, I try to reach every last seed with my mouth. Now the promise of leaving glows the horizon. Learning to speak the language of mums, I ask myself how the fear of small particles affects my everyday experience. Today, I give thanks for the way, in pestilence, living has gone on. I remember Dilly by her bones, now pulverized, like dust of the dead, in whose light we still read our future. I want biodegradable sex. Polypropylene, moss, human hair, pine needles, cardboard, sheepskin condoms, coffee grounds. This sculpture reveals the demand my transition has created for the plastics industry over time. By melting plastic syringes into a compressed form, I hope to create an anticlimax by showing all at once the slow accumulation of material. When you observe me and then the sculpture, is the volume of plastic more or less than what you would expect? Do you agree strongly, agree, neither agree nor disagree, disagree, or strongly disagree that certain plastics should remain single use? By incorporating an assortment of organic elements, I wanted to create a sense of grief out of the cognitive dissonance. Plasticos, to form or mold, an art long before plastics were invented. Trans is a way of arranging the world through change, but plastic is durable, meaning it never goes away. Very light, gets blown along in gentle winds. It gets washed by rain into sewers, streams, rivers, and finally oceans. It burns forever in landfills, a campfire around which we tell scary stories. It is pleasurable at times when a container fulfills the functions for which it has been designed. I hope to return to Earth a little bit more every day until I'm finally you again. The beasts have been too kind. Season of see-through deciduous, fallen limbs lying in repose. What's unpassable in snowfall is still a simple leap. Please watch your feet on decomposing leaves. Blueberry light stretches swollen fingers between trunks. Din, a brunch. Laundry singes nasal hairs, blocks from any basement. All night, lamplight knocks against my window from the top of the ravine. Though the beasts have been too kind, the barred owl has been asking, who cooks for you? Who cooks for you all? The terrible moment when one wants to say everything. Before I close with my final poem, I just want to express my deep gratitude again to my co-reader, Joy Ladin, our wonderful host, Sam Ace and Charis Books for making this event possible, to all of you for hanging out with us on a Thursday night with poetry. And I'm going to close with a poem with Elegy for Walter from the future. So a poem that brings us back to Walter Mercado, the rooster at the heart of this collection. Elegy for Walter from the future. No more Michigan, no more Washington. What rattled in my ribcage still awakens me. No more gals in the backyard bossed by a miniature piñata with wings. No more teardrop, no more rabbits. Hope these gone pieces of my life are together somewhere out there. Is it true you died so I could live? Or is there no scheming rhyme? Some leaves fall and other ones don't, whim of the wind. And who'd go back to Michigan? That place was early death for me. I've learned some have to choose over and over to live, and some of us do. I think if you were here, you'd get it. laying there next to my stockpile, hearing what sounded like you practicing your crow, and it was the civil disturbance that rattled my skedaddle out of there. Walter. Another near miss. I knew all along, had seen inside my dream the letters of your crow jumble, become an arc, dissolving into rain or confetti. An invitation I accepted through intense and sudden connections with whatever your frequency shattered. I rode your rainbow all the way to high desert. And even here, I remember, morning now so unannounced. Thank you.
Oh, thank you both. How beautiful. I'm really blown away, and you know, just love hearing those poems, Oliver, Joy. Just great gratitude. We do have a few minutes for any questions, thoughts. If you put them in the chat, I'll be able to communicate them. While you're thinking about that, I could just start us out. This is again is a conversation. And if you two, Joy, Oliver, want to ask each other questions, please do so. I just thinking about both of your work, and again, that the absolute survival in these poems, and also appreciating the what you were talking about, Joy, just paying attention to life, you know, trans or not, but just really paying attention to it. But I still do think of these acts of survival. Poetry is an act of survival, and I just find joy and awe in this work. But also the acknowledgement of the cost. You leaving Michigan, Oliver, the impingement of bureaucracy and the liberal philosopher next door, or so-called, all of that. So yeah, I mean, instead of even talking about language and writing at this point, in the midst of it all, besides the act of writing after living, as you pointed out, Oliver, what do you do for your own self-care in the midst of it all?
I mean, some days it's very rolling it back to basics of just like, have I eaten? Have I drank water? Very basics. I play basketball. I draw. Um, and yeah, I feel very lucky to have people in my life whose friendship and support and like being on this weird planet uh, at the same time as them uh, just helps like tether me and brighten days. Um, and what the self-care, it can be something different every day, and a lot of times it's just the small stuff that like there aren't like listicles about, and it's not like really cute to talk about, but it's just like, okay, great, like, all right, like,
Yeah.
we can take time to eat, we can have a small joy or a big one. Yeah.
Yeah. You, I,
I just you said listicles. One of the things I so love about this new book of yours is you're just a magnificent lister. And yeah, I mean, fabulous listing work and very a worthy heir of Whitman, because I feel like you will use any word from any discourse that's necessary. You will take up as much space in any of four dimensions as the poem requires. There's this marvelous expansiveness that to this book in particular that I appreciate. And the thing about a list is it can go on forever. And no matter, you talk about some really difficult things, but the expansiveness gives a sense that you're holding it all. Like your poetry is holding it all. You've given at least one place in the world where all of this broken, difficult, beautiful stuff can all be held in juxtaposition. And I'm very grateful for it.
Thank you. Thank you. That means a lot. Thank you.
So your listing is my self-care, I guess, is what I'm trying to say there. One of the things about being sick and shut in is that it's all self-care. It is so boring. I don't miss being dissociated the way I was all the time when I was living as a guy, but I do miss not even knowing that my body needed care. That not always looking, oh, what's this feeling? What's that feeling? Is this better? Is this worse? My pills. It's like it really sucks. And in my particular case, one of there are many people who have it worse than I do, but my particular illness messes up my central nervous system, which means there's an awful lot of noise, sometimes so much that I can't listen to music, I can't even look out the window, I just can't process anything. There's all this internal noise. So that makes me so grateful for when I'm able to do that, when I'm actually able, not only are my eyes pointed out the window, but I'm able to register that, because it's a beautiful world, even if, it's there's always something that is stunning happening in that world. And so I'm always grateful when the internal noise settles down enough for me to register that. It's not self-care in the sense that I can't will it. It's more like the world is taking care of me, or the world is like one of those nurses my mother had at the end that are always waiting to see if you need something. And the world is like waiting to see if I'm able to receive the care that it's always offering.
I love that.
Yeah, very much. I'm not seeing any questions in the chat yet, but you both, in some ways, yes. I mean, Oliver, your list, but I think also, I love what Joy said about fourth dimension. I do feel that very much. That so much comes in and so much associative image. But for both of you, like I often think about, and this segues into self-care a bit, and what you were just talking about, Joy, just the body itself, as as a wire or a transmitter or kind of a transceiver, um, like Jack Spicer says, that some kind of radio. Do you feel that relates to your work in some way?
I'm thinking about two different things. I'm sorry, who was that question for, Sam? Was it for?
Both of you. I mean, I
Okay.
segued off of what Joy was talking about, like the uh, being shut in, but also when one is able to move those walls apart for a moment at least, but also thinking very much about your work, Oliver.
Yeah. My dear friend Gabby Calvacaresi, who is here, I believe, yes. Uh, talks in amazing ways about the body as a vessel, and I think about that a lot. Just like the there is this kind of like, I mean, like the daily, both like containing, but also like getting to be like full, sometimes like overflowing with just the lifeness of life. And Joy, I could relate a lot with what you were describing about, like, I spend a lot of time up here. Like, it's very easy for me to be up here and, like, annoying as hell with, like, the squirrels chattering, but also, like, it can feel like, yeah, intense to drop down into, like, oh, like, what is happening in the world, like, through the senses. And Maxine Hong Kingston has, in her book To Be a Poet, she has this, like, kind of, like, deceptively simple prompt. I feel like it's deceptively simple because it's, like, it's numbered. Do you know what I mean? Like, even though each step is very complex, it's like, oh, it's like there, but these are discrete steps, right? And the gist of it is kind of toggling back and forth. Like, each step toggles you back and forth between, like, inner landscape, outer landscape, like, just seemingly very simple, right? Like, I look at it and I'm like, oh yeah, okay, cool. And then I actually did it. I was like, oh, it's like tuning into outer landscape, and then close your eyes. How do you feel inside? Write some things down. Open your eyes. Look again at what's around you. Notice stuff. Write some things down, and, like, kind of has a few rounds of that. And then at the end is just sort of like, put the language together in a way that only you could. And so I've been, like, playing around with that a little bit sometimes, just out on walks. And even that simple, like, the toggling between the inner and outer, can be profound. And I think it is in those little moments, even in, split seconds of them, that it does feel like, I don't know, something's getting through, and Gabby also said something once about being the notebook until they got back home. And that has also stayed with me in this way. It's just like, there was, in the context of, they forgot their notebook. And so I think about that in terms of, like, being the notebook. I just loved that. It was such a gift of a line to me. And that feels resonant, Sam, to me, with what you were asking about.
Yeah. Thank you.
One of the reasons that I love haiku writing in my, extremely lax, we're not counting syllables, we're only counting up to 3 in terms of lines, is that they do spring out of moments of attention. And a show, we had a poetry workshop. I love that, I'm not really sure that there is any other history of poetry teachers earlier than the haiku poets in Japan at this time. I mean, I've never heard of it, but, somebody brings him a poem, and he said, the problem with this poem is it's subjective and objective. And the person said, do you mean too subjective and too objective? He said, no. And I think that that in his work, and this I don't think that this is true of Isa at all. Isa was kind of my model. Isa is so personal and so there. And I'm not even sure that in many of his haiku you have, like, the toggling of attention so much. It's something else. But Basho was always looking for these moments where it's like it's just existence that's happening, and existence rubbing against consciousness. There's always loneliness. There's always evanescence. It's always all there, but he wasn't interested in the postures of either objectivity or subjectivity. Like, he didn't want to toggle between those. He was just like, if you're doing one of those things, you're not getting it. Must have driven the student crazy.
Well, thank you. I think that's actually a great place to end. We really come to the end of our hour, and just wonderful to have both of you tonight. so everyone in the audience knows, again, this is being recorded. So if you know folks who missed this, let them know. It should be posted to YouTube, or I think for a while you can actually get the recording if you just click on your ticket registration. It'll come up. So thank you all for coming. And Oliver, Joy, if you want to stick around back for a minute, please do. And good night, everyone. Oh,
You all.
we should tell you next month on October, I believe it's October 10th, the second Thursday. This series is actually going to be turned over to a celebration of my new book, which is coming out also on October 1st. I want to start by saying, which is actually a book of length essay, poetic essay, somewhere between essay and poetry. And I will be joined by three other writers, Andrea Abi Karam, Maura Motea, and Soretta Morgan will be joining me in that celebration. That'll be in person at Charis if you're in the Atlanta area, again at 7:30, and but it will be live streamed. Thanks,
Sam's
everyone.
book is so good. Sam's new book is so good.
So good. Congratulations, Sam. Congratulations, Oliver.
Joy, congratulations.
Congratulations, Joy and Oliver. See you all. Take care. Bye-bye.
Good night.
Good
Good night, everyone. Bye.